The M1 Mac Studio. I'm gonna have to rewrite this. I edit a lot of video. That might be kind of obvious judging by the fact you're watching this video. So last year I bought the M1 Mini to replace a 16-inch Intel i9 MacBook Pro, and that upgrade was incredible. I went from spinning beach balls and loud fans all the time to blissful silence and fewer spinning beach balls. Apple's M1 is power efficient, but in the first iteration it was only marginally faster in certain conditions than the high-end Intel chips it replaced. I mean, it was 30% faster than my old machine recompiling Linux, but it was also slower for some tasks. But then came the M1 Pro and M1 Max, but they were only available in laptops. Since I don't travel much these days, I've been rocking a small MacBook Air for light work and an M1 Mac Mini with 10 gig Ethernet for my main workstation. But after the Apple Studio was announced, I bought it right away, and well, it came today. Even though my Mini's performance wasn't that restrictive, this Studio blows it away. Instead of 4 efficiency cores and 4 performance cores, I have 2 efficiency cores and 8 performance cores. I'm going from 16 gigs of RAM to 64. I upgraded from 2 terabytes of storage to 4, and it's got more GPU cores, more I/O ports, including my favorite thing, this little card reader built into the front. And when I first pulled this thing out of the box, I thought to myself, you look like Deep Thought. You know, that AI from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Anyways, speaking of the box, that thing is some sort of origami nerd's dream. I'm not sure Apple had to go to the lengths they did with the packaging, but at least my wife was impressed by the paper sleeve the computer was wrapped in. She said, and I quote, "It's like a really premium paper towel." Nice job, Apple. I guess that's what a $4,000 paper towel feels like. While I'm at it, the power cord is also sleeved in some sort of fabric, and it's nice and springy, and I don't really know how to describe it. Basically, it doesn't get all kinky like my other power cables. That didn't come out right. None of this really matters unless the computer can do stuff better. The first thing I was wondering is how loud these fans are. Most of the inside of this thing is the new cooling system, and if I put it on my desk, I don't want to hear fan noise all day. And luckily, Apple did a pretty good job. It's not silent like my M1 Mini seems to be, but it's nearly so. It's definitely right around the noise floor of my office, like maybe 28 or 30 decibels, and I never heard it ramp up even after a couple hours of benchmarking. I just hope it doesn't get clogged up with dust on this intake on the bottom. If I ever want to clean it up for a good cleaning, it looks like, according to iFixit, you have to remove this entire rubber ring on the bottom just to access the 4 screws. At least it can be open still. I wouldn't put it past Apple to weld one of these things shut if they could get away with it. Now, I chose the Max version and not the Ultra. That means it's not bleeding edge. It doesn't have 2 Maxes welded together with Ultra Fusion or anything fancy like that. But I think most people who buy the Studio will probably go for the Max like I did, since the price is a bit more down to earth, especially since Apple charges an arm and a leg plus a kidney or 2 for their SSD upgrades. But the headline feature for me, since I edit video, is the built-in ProRes encode-decode engines, and that's already a massive upgrade, even on this mid-tier Studio. But those who watch this channel know I just built my first PC in years, an all-AMD Ryzen 5600X build with an RX 6700 XT, hashtag not sponsored. And part of the reason I built that machine was to have a faster way to recompile Linux when I'm experimenting on the Raspberry Pi. So my question is, can this Mac Studio I bought recompile Linux faster than my new AMD PC? And the answer is no, it's just a tiny bit slower. For my Raspberry Pi compiles, the Mac Studio I bought finishes in 375 seconds compared to 363 seconds on the Ryzen machine. That's not a huge difference, of course, we're talking about 3%. And all in, that Ryzen machine cost around $1,000, not including the graphics card. The Mac Studio starts at $2,000, so it should be faster, right? Well, it is sometimes. Like when editing video, especially in ProRes, it's a monster. And in some benchmarks like Geekbench, it soundly beat the Ryzen 5 with its piddly 6 performance cores. In fact, both my M1 Macs seem to score higher on Geekbench for a single core, with both Macs scoring in the 1700s versus about 1600 for the Ryzen. And just for fun, I ran Cinebench on all 3 machines, and here are those scores. The Mac Studio was just a tiny bit faster than the Ryzen in this test, though Marquez from MKBHD said the Ultra scores just above 24,000, so if benchmarks are what you're after, the M1 Ultra is the chip for you. I also wanted to measure how efficient each computer was. Using a kilowatt, I measured the Ryzen desktop and the Mac Studio at idle and while running Cinebench R23. The Mac Studio idles at 6 watts, while the PC idles at 39. That's 6 times more power consumption. Granted, you can build PCs with components that are better at idle power consumption, but most higher-end Intel and AMD CPUs eat up a lot more idle power. And when I ran Cinebench, the delta was still huge. The Ryzen CPU boosted the power consumption of the system up to 151 watts continuous, while the Mac Studio consumed only 38. The Studio is 4 times more efficient under load and 6 times more efficient at idle. Many benchmarks was close, but if it's 4 times less expensive to power the beast, the Mac Studio's a better value as an always-on workstation, at least for me. But I don't put a ton of stock into synthetic benchmarks. What matters most is what you can do with your computer. And in my case, this Mac Studio is the perfect blend of price and performance for a mid-tier video editing workstation. It's tiny and almost silent. But the Ryzen PC, it's also great. I can do tons of hardware testing, and it can run pretty much any game I want to play. I can't open up Halo Infinite on the Mac now, can I? Now, the other interesting opportunity this brings up is the fact that until I sell my old Mac Mini, I can do some fun experiments on it. One thing I'm planning on doing very soon is installing Asahi Linux, which is a build of Linux specifically tailored for M1 Macs with Apple Silicon. And just this weekend, the team behind it announced their first alpha release. So let me know in the comments if you want me to test that first or get back to some Pi GPU testing. I'm kind of excited for both. Oh yeah, Pi GPUs. Did you know I finally got that tiny M.2 VGA card working on the Pi? Well, sorta. There's a lot to discuss, and thanks especially to everyone who's been helping on GitHub. Anyways, I'm gonna set up the studio using my Mac automation playbook using Ansible, and if you wanna know how I do that, check out the card up there. And soon I should be getting one of these, a 3U rack mount kit for the Mac Studio from My Electronics. So subscribe so you don't miss any of these awesome projects, support me on Patreon if you want me to keep doing them, and until next time, I'm Jeff Geerling.